following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it's Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. The answer about money, of course, on The Answer, KLFE, The Answer. The answer about money. So since 1979, people have been talking, well, not since 1979, but in the past 10 to 15 years, people have been talking about manufacturing and how we're losing manufacturing jobs, how they're going overseas, or they're going to Mexico, or to Canada, or to China, or Vietnam, or somewhere else in the world. We reached a peak in 1979 with 19.7 manufacturing jobs, and today we have 6.9 fewer manufacturing jobs. Now, we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to also talk about the recession. Are we coming up to a recession? Are we not coming up to a recession? There's a lot of talk now about a recession. You know, this market has been going for a long time. The economy's been going for a long time. Are we going into a recession? I don't think so. I also have a really great guest today. She's back to update us on what's going on, so you want to hear what she has to say. But let's go back to this manufacturing. There's general feeling that we don't make things in the U.S. anymore, that all the jobs and all the manufacturing has gone overseas. It's gone to other countries. But would it surprise you if in 2007 we reached a record manufacturing, and then we declined, of course, through the Great Recession? But would it surprise you to know that in 2014 we surpassed the record in 2007, and today we are setting new manufacturing records. 2007 we were just under $2 trillion. Today we're at almost $2.1 trillion in manufacturing. We manufacture 17 to 18% of the world's produced goods. Yes, it's down from 30% in the 1980s, but that's not because we've lost that. It's because other countries have been adding to it. China has surpassed us. They're producing almost $2.2 trillion in manufacturing. Japan, 1.1. Between those three countries, 48% of the world's manufacturing. The aspect that's going on right now is that manufacturing as a percent of GDP. As a percent of GDP in 1967, manufacturing accounted for 53% of the U.S. GDP. 53% of all the goods and services produced, manufacturing. Today, it's down to 12%. It's not that we're producing anymore. It's that there's been a shift to services away from manufacturing. You know, yeah, we've gone from 19.6 million jobs to 12.8 in this year. But a lot of that has been not jobs going overseas, but productivity. I had John Olson from OMAC on the program. They were talking about doing and cutting steel using water beams, cutting steel an inch or 2 inches in diameter. I remember back at the time I got out of school and working around some of the machine shops where they had lasers, and you had laser mechanics, laser journeymen, who would take a piece of metal and by sight hone it down to a fairly fine, precise piece. Took a lot of training, a lot of expertise. I had a chance a couple years ago to go visit the Remley plant in Ohio, and they don't use human beings anymore. They plug a program into computer-aided design. They put in a piece of metal. The machine goes to work. It's computer-driven, and they can take a piece of metal down to less than a width of a hair. That's the kind of machine work they can do. Humans never could do that. That's been the kind of change that's gone on. And what does it mean? It means that one job is eliminated because of that machine. In fact, it's more than one job because that machine can do the work of several people. If you look at how Boeing manufactured, and the reason I was at Remley is because Boeing buys components from there. If you look at a Boeing plane, a 737, a 757, they have a door, and that door is manufactured, but it's not machine manufactured. At Remley, they were proposing to manufacture that door by machine, so precise that every door would always fit. Right now, when you're assembling an aircraft, they have to work with that door to make it fit into the aircraft because it's not that precise. Now, maybe all that's changed. Maybe Remley is producing the doors for Boeing, but at the time I was there, they were manufacturing and proposing to manufacture doors which were down to millimicrons, or whatever they called it. I should know off the top of my head. That's been a long time ago. But that's the precision, and that's the change that's going on. I want to take you back to give you another example which shows what's going on in manufacturing. I want to take you back 150 years. Actually, a little more than that, 170 years. In 1850, the United States had 23 million people, and we had 11 of those 23 million people were employed on the farms. 64% of the people of the population of the U.S. was employed on the farms. Our agricultural exports were $189 million, and that agricultural exports accounted for 81% of our total exports. Cotton alone accounted for $124 million, or 54% of the total exports. By 1900, we had 76 million people and 29 million farmers. Today, we have fewer than 1 million farmers, and they're producing 600 times what we produced in 1850. Maybe it's closer to 700 times by now. So what happened? Tractors came along, combines came along, all those milking machines came along, all those significant productivity gaining devices, or productivity gains, significant gains. In 1850, it was horses. It was a single person. To harvest a field, you had a scythe, and I'm not a farmer, so I'm just, I watch TV to get all my farming experience. But you had one person. You had a horse. 2014, you have the tractors, the combines. You have automated milking parlors. You have plants and animals that are being produced. I gave a program on chickens a couple months ago, and the size of the chickens has significantly increased. All that has gone in to producing agricultural products that are more than 600-fold what we produced in 1850 with less than 10% of the labor. The same thing's going on in manufacturing. We produce now 17 times as much output 17 times as much output today as we did in 1940. Think about that. 17 times. Productivity has been gaining 3 to 5% a year. When you multiply that and compound that, that's where we get to. You look at manufacturing companies, and we're seeing changes in the way factories are designed. We're seeing robotics come along. We're seeing computers come along. We're seeing all that happen, and productivity gains happening. So this whole concept that manufacturing jobs are going offshore, that manufacturing jobs are being lost and that we're not manufacturing anything here, that's not really true. What we're seeing are changes in what we're doing. Manufacturing is giving away to the service side, to the things where we're gaining productivity in terms of the manufacture process that we're using, but it's also giving away to jobs like I have, like attorneys, like software people. Those are where the value is coming. Think about it. In 1945, we didn't even have a single software engineer. Not one. You know, in 1945, well, in the 1940s, during World War II, there was a need for doing computations to determine how to aim the big guns during the war. And so they set up a room of people, and they would take into account the wind, the weather. They would take into effect how far the enemy was away. They would take into effect the humidity and the heat, the temperature, and they would calculate how to aim those guns. And we're coming to a commercial break. I'll tell you the rest of the story when we come back. I think it's a fascinating story, and it relates to what we're doing. How? We'll be back right after commercial, and I'll tell you how it all relates. Don't go away. Got a lot to cover, and you want to hear my guest? We'll also talk about the recession. So we're coming up to a break. Don't go away. Hang on. I'll be right back.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm back. Sorry about that. I started to talk about during World War II. It's a story that a few people know about, but during World War II, they would set up a room of people who would actually figure out how to aim the big guns to fire at the enemy. Those guns were firing a long way away, and there was a lot of room for error. So you had a room full of people who were making the calculations. And the government came along and they said to a company, they said, can you build a machine that can do those calculations? And of course, that company was IBM. And they said, yes, we can make a machine. Later, as the work was coming to an end, Tom Watson testified before Congress. They asked him, how many machines do you think you will make? And he said, probably 5, no more than 15. You know, the rest of that is the story. Paul Harvey used to say the rest of the story now, you know. The people that sat in that room that made those calculations, they were called computers. That was their job title. And of course, we now know we're seeing a lot more than 15 computers. We're 5 computers, 15 computers. We see computers in the phones that we carry. We carry so much computing power today. But in 1945, there were no computer engineers. There were no computer manufacturing going on. All that has been changed. All that is taken away from the manufacturing field. Total employment in 1940 was over 35% was in manufacturing. From 1940 to 2019, it grew over 20-fold in terms of output, and in terms of labor, it's very few more labor than we had in 1940. It's been productivity that's done it. It's been disruptive technology. Factory types have changed, job skills have changed, and think about the impact it's had. Think about it in your life. When my parents bought their first TV, it was $400 and some. It was something they had to buy on a 3-year contract because $400 was almost a month's pay. It was a small screen. I can't remember if it was 17 or 15 inches in size. It was black and white. There was no remote control. You had to get up and twist the knob. There were only 3 channels. And even those 3 channels, when they came in, and I grew up in Independence, Oregon, so we weren't in a major city, but we had an antenna on the roof, and those 3 channels had snow. If I asked my children what snow was, if I asked my grandchildren what snow was, they couldn't tell you. But on the screen, you had these little flakes. It was something that came along and was just part of watching TV, was to have that snow. Now, in my office, I have a 43-inch screen that sits on my wall that I can watch CNBC with. Sits there all day long, and that TV is a flat screen. It's not anywhere near the weight that my parents' was, and the cost was the same thing as my parents paid. And my parents bought that over 50 years ago. So in terms of technology has exploded, but that's also meant that the devices that we buy are significantly cheaper. I can remember the cars when I was growing up. You didn't have automatic windows. You had to roll them down. You didn't have air conditioning. If you wanted air conditioning, you rolled the window down. And in very hot days, you had these things. They were like a big tube. They looked like they had hay inside. You put them in the window, you poured cold water in, the air would blow through, and for 17 seconds you had cold air, and then you had hot air blowing in. You had no power brakes. You didn't have automatic. You had a gear shift. You had to learn to drive in first, second, and third, sometimes in fourth. You had to use the clutch. All those things that came along have made the cars safer, stronger, and more convenient. And if you look at the price of a car today compared to the price of a car in 1950, it hasn't changed very much. And talking about cars, think about the change that's gone on there. In 1950, GM dominated the car world. In 1950, they were worried because Chevrolet was the second largest GDP in the world. Chevrolet was the largest. Only the United States had a larger GDP than Chevrolet did. There was a lot of concern that they were going to break up General Motors because of the domination of General Motors and Chevrolet. Think about it. 3 companies. They dominated the car market worldwide. Today, there's 14 different companies that are manufacturing cars in the U.S. And a number of those are foreign manufacturers, but you have more than 3 U.S. manufacturers that are manufacturing cars, and you have a couple, 2 or 3 more car companies that are developing prototypes to compete against the cars that are on the road. The world has changed. Manufacturing has changed. And to think about manufacturing in terms of manufacturing jobs and that we're losing the jobs to productivity more than we're losing it to overseas. So that all comes into play, and manufacturing has been a decreasing part of the economy. So anyway, wrapping it up, as we go forward, even as manufacturing jobs are lost, it doesn't necessarily mean we're headed for a recession. It doesn't necessarily mean that the country is falling behind. It just means there's shifts going on. We're headed for a time when there will be a recession. I don't think that's coming soon, but we're going to talk about that very soon too. But I want to introduce my guest today. Coming back to update us is Karen Clark-Cole of Blink UX. Welcome to the program, Karen.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So why don't we start again with a little bit of your background for those who haven't heard about
Sure.
who you are.
Sure, and then I'll tell you how in 2005 we thought we had hired all 10 people in our field, and now there's thousands and thousands and thousands, so it's in line with the shifting trends that you're talking about.
It is.
My background is in visual arts. I started as an art major and then made my way through the digital world in the late 90s through to websites and software when interactivity became a thing. So it was really as the web was getting started. You needed to be able to figure out how to navigate from one place to another, be able to understand where you landed and how you got there. So this is all the field of information architecture, which led into interaction design. And largely what we understand as user experience these days.
So interaction design, tell us more about that.
It's really just deciding, so let's say you're going to go to your online bank and you want to find your money. First thing you have to do is you have to log in and you have to enter your password in the right place. You have to click on a button and that'll take you to your account, and then you'll see a listing of your accounts, and then you're going to go deeper into one of them and look for deposits or withdrawals or different things like that. And so how you get through that system, that's the interaction piece of it.
Okay.
So that experience needs to be designed. And nowadays there's a lot of standards out there and models that new systems, new sites can use, whereas in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, there were really no examples out there, so it was being made up, and so there wasn't a good interaction model to follow of, this is the standard for banks, or this is the standard for accessing any kind of account information online. So we were really designing that from scratch in a lot of cases.
And when you say we were designing it from scratch, tell us about it.
Well, me and the 5 other people who were doing it. It was pretty early on. So for me, it was natural coming from the graphic design world, because often, and it really started with CD-ROMs. So we would do design educational CD-ROMs was sort of the first sort of foray into what's now just a common website. Where you have things that are designed, so there's the look and feel of them, there's the interface, which is commonly known as what are the menu items, how is the page organized, and then there's the visuals of it, so how does it look, is it nice looking, does it meet with the brand? So all of that led naturally to the movement through a system or a site. And so, it was me and the other graphic designers in a lot of cases, and some people coming to the field were coming from a product design background. So you really have to deal with form and function in those cases. So it lended itself into this new digital world of understanding how does somebody move through something, what are their expectations, what are their needs in a lot of cases. So nowadays at Blink we base all of our design work, and we did at the beginning as well, on user research. So really understanding who the customer is, so who's coming to the site or the service or the product. What's their context of use? So what's the world like that they are using this within? Are they at work? Are they walking down the street? Are they in a car? And then, what are their needs and their expectations? And if you understand all of those things, then you can design something that is really very intuitive for them. And if you don't do that, then you might design something that's good and nice, but it may not hit the mark exactly for this particular customer's needs. So it may not be intuitive for them because it's not speaking to their context of use or their mental model in some cases. If you look at a financial system or rebalancing tool, for example, there's a certain mindset of the people using that. And if you don't understand them, you might have a good design and it might be close, but it's not going to necessarily make their workflow more efficient in some cases, or save money and time.
So we're going to come back to that, because I have some real questions about that. Don't go away if you're listening. We've got a lot more to cover, and this is really a fascinating thing to hear about. We're going to hear a lot more about it, so don't go away. And we'll come back to the recession as well, so stay with us. We've got a lot to cover before the end of this program. Stay with us.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Karen Clark-Cole of Blink UX. We've been talking about making things intuitive. And I can remember way back when I got my first computers and having to think about loading things in and putting in formulas to make things work. I can remember the first drop-down windows, how strange that appeared to be. And yet, today, everything you do has a drop-down window practically. So when you talk about intuitive, talk to us more about that.
Sure, and I think the funniest thing about what you just said is loading things in, because that rarely happens anymore either. They're all downloads, and in some cases, they're automatic downloads. And so when we talk about intuitive, it really is specific to who's using it. So what's intuitive to me may be very different for what's intuitive to you. And it depends on our experience in the world, as well as with computers specifically, or various digital products. It's not hardly ever a computer anymore, it seems like. But even if you go back to your farming example, driving a tractor these days, that's a digital experience. And so what's intuitive for a farmer when they're up in the combine looking at the massive number of displays that are in a tractor these days, it's going to be different for that person than it is for me as a CEO running a company. So what's really important there is the context of use, but then also understanding everything you can about the specific user type is how we describe it. And in some cases, a user type may be very broad. So if you look at the Starbucks mobile ordering app, that's a very broad audience. And so what we do there is we take the lowest common denominator of what do we know about what's common among all the people using that. And so the information coming in is much smaller and broader because you have a much bigger audience type. Whereas if it's, let's say it's an internal tool for a company that's running their back office, we actually know the names of those users in that case, and there may be 200 of them, people that use this system. And so in that case, we can get very specific and move very sort of high up the food chain in terms of specific designs and the interface, as well as just the general interactivity and what the system does. So we can make it very specific for that user type. In all of those cases, it needs to be designed. So gone are the days where you can have anyone just coming in and putting something together, and if the code works, it's good to go. That doesn't work anymore. And I often use the example of a construction site. So it used to be that you would have the construction crew coming in, a pile of wood would get delivered, and they'd start hammering. And what came up, they weren't really sure what was going to end up. It might be an apartment building, a house, a big office building. It could be anything. And they're, hammering away based on their experience in having done it before and, how this team is working together. So if you think, wow, it'd be good to have an architect in there, and the construction crew probably prefer to be building off a set of drawings where they have the exact dimensions of the beams or the nails they should be using, and where the door should go, and how many stairs, and is this 5 bedrooms or 1, or is it an office building? So it sounds sort of crazy to imagine building something without that, and which is what was happening in the early software days. So nowadays, user experience is really plays the role of the architect in the app or anything that's digital, which is really everything nowadays. So most things have a digital component, whether it's sort of obvious or not. And in fact, nowadays, our work spreads well beyond digital, and we talk about service design. Is a fairly new term in the industry, and what that means is designing the entire customer journey. So if you think about a bank or a hotel, there's the, if we take a hotel, so you may book your room online, on your computer or on your phone, let's say, and then you go to the city, you find the address, you walk into the lobby, you're going to talk to a receptionist to check into your room, then you may even get a mobile key. Then you're going to go to your room, and there's real physical experience there. So what does your room look like? So you have a certain expectation of the cleanliness or the type of linens, these kind of things. But all of those things, whether you're on your phone, on your computer, you're in the lobby, you're in your room, you expect that to be one experience. And this is what we talk about now with a customer experience all up. So the brand of that Hilton or Marriott or whatever it is, it needs to be consistent through booking online. It was easy. Could I find my room? Could I check in online? Did I get to choose my room? All these kind of things are one experience. And so when we're talking about, in terms of my business, service design, we're looking at what are all the services and products that a customer comes. And so it's not only making it intuitive for them getting through the actual booking of a room, let's say, but it's the all-up experience. And so now the the user experience has been elevated to the entire company's brand. And if you look at a bank, it's the similar kind of example. Airlines, cruise lines, it's all the same. So when I'm booking my flight on Alaska Airlines, I expect that experience to be matched with the service I get on the plane. It should be easy, it should be intuitive, it should be friendly, customer centric. So the expectation is really spread. People in general are much more sophisticated about this, and they're demanding it, which is causing companies to have to do it. So it's no longer, I talk about it as being, used to be a nice to have or a competitive advantage, and now I talk about user experience as a business requirement. If companies aren't taking it seriously, they won't be around for very long because they really won't have any customers. They've seen what it looks like and they're demanding it.
So what about, my custodian is Interactive Brokers, and when you're talking about that, you have maybe 1,000 individual financial advisors, or maybe there's 10,000. I don't know how many are on the site. And each one has a little different requirement. What I require is very different from what most require. Some are looking at financial planning, some are looking for tactical trading, some are looking for different types of services from that custodian. How do you begin to make that work all together?
Well, if the idea is that it's a unified site and it's a unified service, then it needs to work together. It's okay if there's some unification, but within that there's separate service offerings, separate unique experiences, but it needs to be clear what the strategy is, and that needs to be clear through to the end user. So in some cases you'll see that, take NASA for example, there, in many people's minds there's one NASA. However, there's over 3,000 websites that are NASA branded, and each one is different. And so, but yet they all have sort of a common upper level navigation that links them to the mothership. So it's very confusing from an end user standpoint because, for me, I don't understand why they're different, why they aren't all consistent, telling me the same message in the same kind of way, or different content, but in the same sort of structure. So I would say for your custodian example, it's what is the strategy? Is it that they're all very different and unique, and in that case that's fine and they should be? Or is it that we're coming to one site and there's some sort of unification around them? And whatever it is, it needs to be well designed and very clear so that the end user understands what's going on, because in many cases a company will organize their website by the org chart, and we can't touch that area because that's a different budget in a different group and they don't work together. Well, me as an end user, I don't care about that. I'm coming to this one company and I don't care who owns the budget in that org. And so we really just need to step back and look at it from the user's perspective. Who's logging in? If they knew nothing about how this company was run or this service, what would they think? And so the only way to really know that is to ask them. And so this is where the user research comes in. And so we spend, I think we've counted, at Blink that we've done over 3,000 end user interviews, and those are generally an hour to 2 hours long. So it's a lot of hours of actually just talking to people, and that is really the only way you're ever going to know, because I'm never the end user. Anybody that works for us, we all know too much, and we're never the specific user type. So the best way to find out is to ask the people, coming to your website, for example, what do you think about it when each one has a different requirement or a different service? That's the only way to find out, and you do find out. It's incredible the intelligence that you get just by asking people, what do you think? They'll tell you.
So what happens when you have 1,000 different answers or 500 different answers? How do you correlate all that together?
We look for patterns. Together? It's unusual that you would have that many, believe it or not. You see patterns right away. So especially if we're looking, so there's a little bit of difference in what we talk about generative, which is really first out of the gate research that we do when we're trying to understand just context of use and people's motivations, and if you use something like this, what would your needs be, or what would you expect? Versus we're having somebody look at an active live system and we're looking more for usability feedback. Are you able to get through it? Are you able to complete your tasks? These kind of things. In the usability side, we start seeing patterns right after, really after 3 people. 4 to 5 people, we've got some really solid patterns right away. It's incredible, actually. So we do very small numbers as a result. So our studies, usually we go up to anywhere from 8 to 12 participants, depending on how complex the system is and if there's different user types that we need to look at. But within one user type, patterns emerge very quickly. And the same is true for the generative research. We do larger numbers generally for that kind of work, but you see patterns quickly. And again, we're not designing everything for everybody. We're looking for patterns and common denominators, and then we base it off of that.
It's fascinating. And an important thing, it takes sites to a new level. So tell us how somebody could contact you if they would have an interest.
Our website, blinkux.com. Yeah, lots of good information on there. And we're in Seattle. We have 5 offices. So we're in Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Austin, and Boston. So
and they would get information about customers and
yeah, you bet. Yeah.
So do that. Contact Blink UX. Go to the website. And if you have the need, if you really want a really good upgrade, do Blink UX. We'll be right back after this commercial break, so don't go away. I'll come back to the recession. We could be or could not be headed for one. We'll talk about that.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I want to start with deprival superreaction tendency. Think about that. Deprival superreaction tendency. That's how psychologists define a reaction. Investors who irrationally avoid risk when they face a potential for gain, and investors who irrationally seek risk when they face a potential for a loss. Everyone knows the way to make money in the stock market is to buy low and sell high. You know that, right? I don't know the exact numbers. Maybe it's 80 or 70 or 90% who actually buy high and sell low. So why don't they make money? So a few months ago, the cover of The Economist was The Coming Recession. You know, they don't believe it could be imminent, but we're closer to it than last year. It's pretty much like saying, I'm a little older this year than I was last year. You know, we know that there is a recession coming. We just don't know when it's going to happen. I say that I'm always really good about predicting the weather. I'm very, very seldom wrong. I can tell you that it's going to snow in Seattle. I just can't tell you when. I can tell you that it's going to rain. I just can't tell you when. We know there will be a recession. It doesn't mean that we're headed for another great recession. And it doesn't mean that if we have a recession, that it's going to derail the supercycle. It doesn't mean that having a setback is going to cause the supercycle that we've been in and will probably continue to be in for the next 5 to 10 years is going to get derailed. I often give the picture. The supercycle is my view of where we are. It was a study done by the UK, Standard Chartered Bank of the UK. They looked at periods of time when the worldwide economy grew faster than average. The first time from 1870 to 1913, driven by the industrialization of the United States. Second period of time, 1945 to 1970, driven by the rebuilding of Europe, the decolonization. If you think about the U.S., we were building the interstate highway system, we were building airports. Those were times when the world GDP grew at a faster rate than average. I talk about this every 3 to 6 months, so if you've been listening for a while, you know that that's happening. The next supercycle, Standard Chartered Bank predicted, was from 2009 to 2030. They last a long time. What it means is it's being driven by the emergence of, or the development of the emerging nations. People that are moving from subsistence to consumers. I tell the story about one of the clients that I had some years ago who was in charge of an American Standard plant in China, Tianjin, China. 1,000 employees. They were manufacturing bathtubs and shower stalls and toilets. And not one of those employees had ever seen a toilet or a bathtub or a shower stall before they started working there. Now those employees have smartphones, they're buying lattes, and they're driving cars. That's the world that's changing around us, and that's driving the economy. If you look at the Standard & Poor's 500, a lot of people compare the stock market and say the GDP in the U.S. is growing too slow to support the stock market. Think about what's really going on. The revenues for the Standard & Poor 500 companies, 40% of those revenues are coming offshore. They're coming from their sales overseas. You know, we see it in Seattle. You see the companies, the Costco's, the Amazons, the Starbucks that are deriving revenues from overseas. The Microsofts, the Googles, the Facebooks. It's overseas that they're competing. John Templeton, one of the great investors from 1954 to 2000, talked about secular bull markets. They're born on pessimism, they grow on skepticism, they mature on optimism, and they die on euphoria. That's where we are. We're in a secular bull market. It's a long market, and recessions could come along. We know from the last long secular bull market, a lot of us lived through it. 1979 to 2000, or 1982, if you take it from 1982 when the market hit a new high, from that period of time until 2000, that's either 21 or 18 years, depending upon how you want to define it. It was a long period of time. And yet during that period of time, we had 2 recessions. Didn't mean that it derailed the market. The market went from 1,000 in 1982 to over 10,000. Or if you use 1979, it went from 790. That was the bottom in 1979 to over 10,000. That was a significant increase. Today, we've gone from 6,600 to over 27,000. I've mentioned a number of times, I've been saying for over a decade that we're going to reach 100,000 in the Dow. I know it's not like saying there's going to be snow in Seattle. I can't tell you when, but I can tell you it's going to happen. And I'm not telling you that it's never going to be in our lifetime. If you look at what's happening in 2017, the world was in a synchronized acceleration. There was only one country, Venezuela, that had a negative GDP. Every other country was growing. That began to change last year. It's changing this year. We're starting to see a slowdown in global economy. The growth has slowed down from 3.9% in 2017 to about 3.5%. That doesn't mean we're in a worldwide recession. It means we're slowing down some. We're going to see some recession times happen in the U.S. We're going to see some recession times happen overseas. But what we're still seeing is the emerging countries, those that are still growing at a more rapid rate, we're still seeing them grow. We're still seeing their GDPs grow. And we're taking advantage of that. When I started doing this program, my first program, I talked for a full hour by myself. I was going to have call-ins. I listened to talk radio and realized the talk radio hosts are really good because they have people call in and about 3/4 of the questions are really dumb. I decided I couldn't handle that. So I decided to do the program myself. And over a period of time, I realized there's people that I talk to that can bring information, like Karen Clark Cole brought information on her company. One of the persons who's been on the program a few times and does advertising says that he doesn't believe we're in a recession or going to a recession because every recession, as it begins to take place, The first place that companies cut their budget, or one of the very first places, is advertising. And what they're seeing is not cuts in advertising. They're seeing dramatic growth in advertising. That seems to indicate that we're not yet at a recession time. Doesn't mean that we aren't coming to one. In fact, we do know that there will be one. But probably not 2018 and maybe not 2020. So hang in there. Things should get better and better. That's the way I see things. And so far, it's been a good outlook for the year. Our performance has been exceptional. Part of that is a catch-up from last year. Part of it is a catch-up from 2016. But it's been a good time. I will be back next Saturday to talk more. Stay loose, take care, and have a very good week.
Listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial.